Hello and welcome to the HistoryNetwork.org podcast. If you'd like to become a patron of the podcast, we would love you to. And you can do so at patreon.com/the History Network. Thanks to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. The HistoryNetwork.org podcast, season 37, episode 3, The Battle of Abritus, AD 251, Part 2. This episode was written by Murray Darm. Murray is an ancient and medieval military historian from New Zealand living in Australia. He has written more than 100 articles on various aspects of ancient and medieval military history, as well as other historical topics from all periods, ranging from the history of opera to the runic alphabet and recipients of the Victoria Cross. He is the author of Macedonian Phalangite versus Persian Warrior, Athenian Hoplite versus Spartan Hoplite, and Leuctra 371 BC, all from Osprey Publishing. He is, of course, a regular writer on here and a regular on the Ancient Warfare podcast. It is the dream of every ancient historian that some new discovery will solve a mystery of the past, some newly discovered fragment of a lost historian which will make everything clear. Such circumstances are very rare, but the Gothic War of Decius is one recent occasion where exactly the new discovery that historians dream of took place. Between 2007 and 2009, a research project of the Austrian Academy of Sciences on Greek palimpsests of the Austrian National Library in Vienna discovered fragments of an unknown ancient text on 8 pages of a medieval Byzantine manuscript from the 11th century. The original text had been washed off in the 13th century, and the parchment was reused for a new text, a palimpsest. Being able to identify about 15% of the text, the lead researcher, Jana Gruskova, identified these pages as probably coming from Dexippus's history known as the Scythica. Pairing with the Dexippus specialist Gunther Martin in 2012 to 2015, the two deciphered 60% of the fragments, which they then published and called Scythica Vindobonensia, or Dexippus Vindobonensis. And the fragments give us details which otherwise we would not have. Publius Herennius Dexippus was a contemporary 3rd century Athenian rhetorician, statesman, and historian. He distinguished himself when the Goths again invaded in AD 269 and came against Athens itself. He was not, therefore, only a scholar, but had seen the Goths he describes in action and at first hand. Prior to the discovery of the Scythica Vindobonensia, however, our knowledge of Dexippus was restricted to a passage in Photius's Bibliotheca and few fragments. Photius surmised Dexippus's works as a history of the events that happened after the death of Alexander the Great, a historical epitome down to the time of Claudius, and his Scythica describing the wars between the Scythians and Romans and other things of note. His style is free from redundancies, grave and dignified. He might be called a second Thucydides, although he writes more clearly. His characteristics are chiefly shown in his last mentioned work. This seems to be high praise indeed. The fragments of the Scythica Vindobonensia on folios 194 RV and 195 RV deal with the Gothic invasion at the time of Decius. On folio 194 RV, the author reports that the Thracian Philoppopolis had fallen. In Dexippus, however, the Gothic leader of the invasion seems to be named as Ostrogotha rather than Niva. Dexippus then tells us that Decius, having gathered a refreshed army of 80,000 men, decided to prevent the Goths, Scythians from leaving the empire with their rich booty. He then addressed his army, and the first part of his speech survives on folio 194V. On folio 195RV, a Gothic attack under Niver, a sub-king perhaps. The relationship between Ostrogotha and Niver in Dexippus is unclear. Niver's attack on a Thracian town is described, probably the beginnings of the siege and capture of Philippopolis. A third fragment, folios 192V and 193R, deals with an unsuccessful attack of the Goths on Thessalonica and the defensive measures taken at Thermopylae by the Greeks against the invaders who intended to attack central Greece. An address of the Roman general Marianus, only known from Dexippus, to the army follows. Scholars date these last actions variously, dating them to AD 253-254, or 254-255, or 261, or early 262. However, the majority of them fit best with Decius's war against the Goths in 250 to 251. In Jordanus, Ostrogotha, and therefore his successor Niver, was king over both the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths. Getica 98. In modern terms, these seem to correlate to the Wheelbark, Przeworsk, and Cherniakiv cultures. The reason for this identification will soon become apparent. In 1941, in Starowice, Poland, during the construction of defensive works during the Second World War, a cemetery was found with several graves containing fragments of 22 mid-3rd century Roman aurei. These gold coins had been deliberately cut in the quarters. 3 of the coins could be partially reassembled from the quarters. The coins were otherwise nearly pristine and had a very narrow date range, the latest being 251. These were the coins of the plunder of Niver. 2 coins belonged to Gordian III, reign 238 to 244, 2 to Philip the Arab, and the remaining 18 coins to the short reign of Decius. 5 of these were struck for his daughter Herenia Estrusilla, and 1 for his son Hostilian. 9 of the fragments were also pierced. This was not apparent on the remaining quarters, but it is probable that all the remaining coins from which the quarters were cut had also been pierced originally. A 21st century dig in Ulov, Poland, uncovered another aureus of Decius, struck for his daughter between 249 and 251. It was cut deliberately into 10 parts. The grave contained other gold objects cut into 28 pieces. Metal detectorists have also discovered a series of 8 aurei deliberately cut into pieces at Bilopilia, Ukraine. These finds consisted of 17 pieces, 5 pristine aurei of Decius, struck for his son Herennius Etruscus. 4 of these coins were originally also pierced, and 1 was partially melted. And there are others. Another pierced Decius aureus found in Leszczyna, Poland, another in Rypin, Poland, and 1 more at Chernihiv Ruski, Ukraine, in a grave which also had typical Gothic weapons. These 3 examples were all pierced. 1 more aureus of Decius was found in Bronitzia, Ukraine. Currently, 40 coins of Decius are known in grave finds from the Wheelbark and Cherniakiv cultures, 18 of them from Starowice. Other coin finds are of the coins of Gordon III at various points in Poland, or Philip the Arab in Poland and Ukraine. Several of these examples were also pierced. Of the 3rd century gold coins found in the Ukraine, those of Decius account for 30% of all finds. In Belarus, 2 aurei of Decius have been found, 5 at Skuchin in 2011, all pierced and slightly melted. There are other coins too. Those in the collection of the last king of Poland, Stanislav August, contained 45 coins, all pierced, with 12 from the time of Decius and 8 from Gordon and Philip, the 20 coins making up 40% of the collection. These examples are unprovenanced, but were probably found in the king's domains. The collection in the Osolinsky National Institute in Wrocław has 8 3rd-century aurei, all pierced, 5 of Decius and 1 of Philip. One coin is identical to the type found in Ulov. There are other collections where this pattern is repeated. What we seem to be seeing in this over-representation of gold coins from Trajan Decius and his immediate predecessors is evidence of the plunder of Niva, either from the raid more generally, the battle of Abritus itself, and the ransoms of hostages and the annuity agreed by Gallus, or a combination, or indeed from all of these sources. It is a remarkable corroboration of the plundering we are told of in the sources, and the fact that Niva was allowed to return to his homelands with that plunder. His army then seems to have dispersed with their newfound wealth. What the finds also tell us is that the regions from which Niva's army was drawn. We can note that despite Gallus's agreement to pay an annuity, none of these finds contain any coins post-dating Decius. There are other suggestive trends which similar finds tell us. In 1952, a pottery vessel was found at Poleto near Dryanovets containing about 30 aurei, Gordon III to Decius. Was this a burial of battlefield plunder or a burial of the wealth of a senior officer as the battle turned against the Romans? The coins were in pristine condition, which suggests too that newly minted coins were brought to the battlefield, perhaps to buy off the barbarians or to be distributed as donativa to the soldiers. The pot also contained more than 540 denarii and Antoniniani from the reigns of Septimius Severus to Decius, including Herenia Etruscilla, Herennius Etruscus, and Hostilian. Another nearly identical scattered deposit was found in 1997 east of the village of Osonets, with 30 aurei from the reigns of Maximus I, AD 235 to 238, Gordon III, AD 238 to 244, Philip, AD 244 to 249, Decius, 249 to 251, his wife Herenia Etruscilla, and Herennius Etruscus 251, and several hundred Antoniniani from the first half of the 3rd century until Trajan Decius. In the 21st century, south of the village of Rakovsky, 5 kilometers from Poleto, a deposit of a few hundred Antoniniani, Gordon III to Trajan Decius, including some struck for Herenia Etruscilla, Herennius Etruscus, and Hostilian, and 2 aurei of Trajan Decius for Hostilian were found at Abritus itself, a find of 48 Antoniniani dating from the reigns of Gordon III and Decius. All these coin deposits might indeed suggest coins hidden as the battle turned, or coins taken from the fallen and buried to be recovered later. The latter seems more likely. As to the finds in Poland and the Ukraine, in addition to plunder, these finds may also reflect that part of the imperial treasury which accompanied the emperors, their utter defeat and death probably meant all those resources fell into enemy hands, and it was then distributed among the troops of Niva's army. We can surmise that they were distributed widely and perhaps even based on the finds and their spread. Rewards may have been issued based on an agreed sum or merit shown on the battlefield. What is more, we are told that Decius remustered, regathered, or even re-recruited new armies after the defeats and setbacks of 250, although not if we trust Zosimus. Cash on hand would have helped his cause immensely to persuade new soldiers to join or old soldiers to rejoin. The aureus was the largest Roman denomination and the only precious metal Roman denomination at the time. Antoniniani and denarii were smaller denominations. The specific fines of 5 aurei, such as at Shkuchin in Belarus, could suggest that plunder was taken directly from Roman soldiers fallen on the battlefield, as this was the amount traditionally issued as donativum. In the 3rd century, where we can tell donativa were usually between 5 and 20 aurei, higher for officers. The predominance of aurei in the fines suggests that the imperial treasure was seized by the victorious Goths, as does the decrease in gold content for Gallus's aurei in the continuing devaluation of the gold coins of the subsequent emperors Valerian and Gallienus. The pristine condition of some of the coin finds certainly adds to such a picture. The chopping of the coins into pieces, quarters, and as many as 10 pieces further suggests a wide distribution of wealth. The piercing of many original coins might also suggest a way of transporting them on strings rather than in boxes or bags. As such, this too might suggest how they were initially distributed and transported to members of Niva's army. They may also have been used as pendants or ornaments on armor. Perhaps the Goths had so much gold after this victory that they could all afford to do both. Gold aurei were used for pendants or dress accessories by Gothic tribesmen, or to decorate weapons and horse trappings. The holes were hurriedly struck, usually on the obverse, behind the head of the emperor. Some coins have a hole which was placed too close to the edge of the coin, causing it to break the edge, so a second hole was by necessity put through the coin. Only 2 of the finds from Starowice and Ulov are known to be from sacred deposits in graves. For the others, such information was not recorded or is not known. These deposits may all have been similar sacrificial or ceremonial deposits. The cutting of the coins may have been part of the tradition of defacing war booty. The disaster of Abritus may have been so dire that emperors banned soldiers from carrying personal wealth with them onto the battlefield to prevent such wealth from falling into enemy hands. The finds of smaller denominations may have been the personal wealth of the fallen, collected and hidden for later recovery. Zosimus's scathing treatment of Gallus continues after the death of Decius. He accuses Gallus of being so supine in the administration of the empire that the Scythians in the first place terrified all the neighbouring nations and then laid waste all the countries as far by degrees as the sea coast, not leaving one nation subject to the Romans unpillaged, and taking almost all the unfortified towns and many that were fortified. There was war on every side, and a plague broke out due to the deprivations of the Goths. The collocation of the 2 events suggests Zosimus blamed the Goths for the plague, even though it may have predated their invasion. The plague swept away the remainder of mankind in those regions, nor was so great a mortality ever known in any former period. This was the plague of Cyprian, AD 249-262, or 251 or 2 to 270, depending on the source, who wrote about it in his De Mortalitate on the plague. No other source seems to blame the Goths for the plague, however. The plague may have broken out first in Rome, but was widespread, present in Alexandria, Carthage, and other cities, ones far from the deprivations of the Goths. It may have originated in Egypt or Ethiopia, although the latter was a commonly claimed source of plague. Thucydides blamed the Athenian plague on Ethiopia too. The plague may indeed have broken out before the Gothic invasion, around Easter 249. The first references to it are in letters by Bishop Dionysius of Alexandria later that year. Decius ordered a sacrifice for the well-being of the emperor and the empire in late 249 or by January 3rd, 250. Their failure to sacrifice as ordered led to the persecution of the Christians in 250 and 251. Arnobius, writing 50 years later, seems to answer the accusation that Christians were to blame for the plague, Adversus Gentes 1.3. If this sacrifice was ordered to offset the effects of the plague, then Zosimus's next passage makes more sense. At this crisis, observing that the emperors were unable to defend the state but neglected, all without the walls of Rome, the Goths, the Borani, the Urugundi, and the Carpi once more plundered the cities of Europe of all that had been left in them, while in another quarter the Persians invaded Asia, in which they acquired possession of Mesopotamia and proceeded even as far as Antioch in Syria, took that city which is the metropolis of all the East, destroyed many of the inhabitants, and carried the remainder into captivity, returning home with immense plunder, after they had destroyed all the buildings in the city, both public and private, without meeting with the least resistance. The Goths even invaded Asia, plundering Cappadocia, Pessinus, and Ephesus before they were stopped by Marcus Aemilianus, who then marched on Rome and became emperor for a brief period of 3 months in 253, after defeating Gallus and his son in the battle of Interamna Nahars, before he was killed and replaced by Valerian, reign 253-260, and Gallienus, reign 253-268, when a kind of stability returned to the empire. Thanks once again, Murray, for writing that episode for us. If you'd like to have a go at writing an episode for us, or you want to contact us and give us an idea for a subject that you think we've not covered yet, then just drop us a line, info@thehistorynetwork.org for that. And once again, please do consider becoming a patron of the podcast at patreon.com/thehistorynetwork. Once again, thank you to all our patrons who make this podcast possible. Thanks again for listening. You've been listening to the historynetwork.org podcast, written by Murray Darm, read by Nick Barker.